The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson. Hello and welcome to History with Jackson, the home of accessible and digestible history. And welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series, where we'll be talking to some of the historians, living historians and performers here at Chalke about what they're doing at the festival and their work. Now, Chalke History Festival will be covered comprehensively through History with Jackson, be it on our social media, our blog, and our podcast. So if you wanted to check out more and learn more about what's happening at Chalke, do head to the links in the description below. Now, without further ado, I'll leave you to our Chalke History Festival special series episode. Hello and welcome back to our Chalke History Festival special series here on History with Jackson. And we are joined by Giles Milton. How are you doing, Giles?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you very much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. So, your book, The Stalin Affair. The first question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I was fascinated by the personal dynamics between the big three. We've all heard of the big three, Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt. But what was going on behind the scenes? And I began to look into it, and I discovered that there was a small team of fascinating people who were essentially managing this precarious relationship to make sure it didn't come off the rails, which it threatened to do, of course, throughout the war.
And now, I think this is absolutely fascinating, this area of history, this particular period as well. Why do you think it's important for us to study the relationship of the big three? Because we've got this big mythologized picture of each of them, really.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just felt that by going behind the scenes and looking at the people who are managing this relationship, you get a completely different view of the characters involved. So, Stalin, we all know Stalin is a mass murderer, killed 10 million or more of his own subjects, But what's interesting when you're dealing with the people who've actually been negotiating with him, who've been managing him, that a very different character emerges. One he's very sharp, he's very well informed, he's gregarious, he's often very courteous, can be witty. And so, my characters kept arguing that the West were underestimating him, and that beware of this character, that he's not an ignorant peasant, which they treated him as. He's a very dangerous man and very, very shrewd.
And I find that interesting how you've got these different characters and their own personal relationships with these people, and one of them is Kathy Harriman.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about Kathy? She seems to be an important figure in your story.
She's hugely important. In fact, she was the starting point for this story. So I heard that this glamorous, gregarious, vivacious young 23-year-old was sent first to live with Churchill in 1941 and then to go and live in Moscow alongside Stalin in the Kremlin. She was working as aide to her father, who was Averell Harriman, who was Roosevelt's special envoy to Churchill and then to Stalin. And she wrote hundreds of letters, which I was sort of tipped off about her life with these two giants from history. And I contacted the family, and it took a long time, very grand family and everything, but they eventually allowed me to come over to New York and see all these letters. And they're every historian's dream.
Yeah.
You open a box and you've got these letters spill out, photographs, all about her life with Churchill, life with Stalin. It was just a gift, and that was really the starting point.
And I could tell that when you were giving that talk about how much you enjoyed working the primary source material and how much it informed your opinion. Now, as a historian, you've just said it's every historian's dream to find a trove such as this. How important are primary sources for us in building the pictures of the people behind the scenes and those secret conversations that we don't always know about?
I think they're absolutely crucial. These days, sometimes I do worry that people just go to Wikipedia and that's it. They assume they've got everything there. But of course, you go back to the letters and the diaries. These were written at the time, and so you get a completely different flavour of what's taking place. And someone like the British ambassador to Joseph Stalin, Archibald Clark Kerr. His memos, they're extraordinary. He paints a vivid picture of what it was like to try and negotiate with Stalin. So I just think to really understand history and understand the characters who are directing history, you have to look at the primary source material.
And I think that's a fascinating part that you gave there, directing history. And you gave an example in your talk of history being directed.
Yeah.
How, and it comes down to that cliche phrase that a lot of us historians have to deal with, that history is written by the victors. How much does that kind of colour our discussion on these big three and this particular period?
Well, I think actually when I say directing history, I think one could also say curating history, because often it's the victors who decide what papers are going to go into the National Archives, so they're almost creating their narrative of their own time. And Winston Churchill was brilliant at that. He got rid of all the bits where he didn't look quite so good and only put his sort of official how he wanted to be seen. So what's really interesting when you go to his interpreter, for example, and see what he made of Churchill, a very different story begins to emerge. And okay, of course Churchill is the great statesman, but he could be incredibly difficult to deal with. He was, he took offence very easily, and so all the sort of human weaknesses spill out, and I don't know, it makes for a much more rounded and sort of believable character as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because I think when we have these more rounded pictures of these characters, it makes it more human.
Yes.
So what was your favourite human element within your research for this story?
I think the story I told in my talk, which is hilarious, which is when Churchill goes to meet Stalin. It's just Churchill, Stalin, and an interpreter. And this is after a disastrous meeting, and they go back, Churchill goes back into the Kremlin, they have this meeting, they get very, very drunk together, and then Churchill comes back to the dacha where he's staying, and Archie, his ambassador, describes with great hilarity Churchill's glee at having become best friends with Stalin, and he's so excited that he starts ripping off his clothes because he wants a bath, and Archie's going, no, I've got to go, I can't. And he's going, no, stay, I've got some things to tell you. And before he knows it, Churchill's stark naked in front of him. And then I showed the picture that Archie, in his memo to the Foreign Office, he describes this and then draws a picture of Churchill naked. It's wonderful moments.
Seeing that primary source, I absolutely loved it. It's so brilliant and so witty. I think that was one of my favourite stories that you told there as well. Now, obviously, we're at Chalke History Festival. It's a fantastic site.
Oh, it's brilliant, yeah.
What has been your favourite thing about being at Chalke? We are only on the first day. That is a caveat, but what's your favourite thing about Chalke today?
I have to say, I haven't even had a chance to properly look round because I did the schools event this morning and this one this afternoon. I'm looking forward to it, but it looks as fantastic as ever. There's people, stonemasons, there's people making battle heads and God knows what, So it looks as brilliant as ever, and some fantastic, nice old cars knocking around as well.
Oh, that always makes it better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, how can people grab a copy of the Stalin Affair?
Anywhere, any bookshop, Amazon, Waterstones. It's available all over the place. So, yeah.
Awesome. And then if people have any questions for you once they've read the book or listened to this episode, how can they get in contact with you?
Through my website, gilesmilton.com.
Oh,
and I always reply to emails, people who email.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, we'll make sure they're both in the description for people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on. Thanks.